So, India has had a history going all the way back from to 1950 when the Planning Commission was founded. So, there used to be this institution called the Planning Commission, which came all the way up to 2014, and it wrote 5-year plans. But around 1991, India switched course from planning economy to a market economy. So institutional change was required. It took a while, but Prime Minister Modi, when he came in his very first years, made the promise that he is going to actually go in and replace it by a new institution. So this National Institution for Transforming India was formed. Now, in a country like India, which is a federal country with 29 states, there needs to be some coordination between across the states and the center. So that is one of the mandates of this institution. This think it also functions as practically the prime minister's, but generally the government's think tank. And so we effectively did a lot of policy making. The Planning Commission, erstwhile Planning Commission, used to have that role also, but under the Prime Minister Modi, actually it became even more so. So we had the mandate also and of course, because it is a general institution with no specific area of responsibility assigned, it actually has responsibility across all areas. So it works with different ministries to formulate policies. Often Prime Minister's office asks us to pick any area, like if they want a policy for electronic industry, we would write it for them. If they want something on agriculture, we'd do it for them. And sometimes we'll suo moto take up things which are of national importance and push that agenda, bring the Prime Minister's office on board on this and push the policy envelope a bit. So we initiated in many different areas new reforms. One of the areas where we took the lead was to closure of many public sector enterprises that had been running sick. So we started the process, identified the enterprises, and the cabinet had to then approve those, which it did, and many of these enterprises were in the process of closing down when I left. We also pushed the envelope on privatization of many of the public sector enterprises. That process, we got approval of the cabinet on about a couple of dozen of these enterprises, but that process still has not come to fruition, but it will happen perhaps in the next term of the Prime Minister. On education, I initiated major reforms, particularly the higher education system. Nothing had been done since 1950s in terms of reforming the entire structure that governs the higher education system. So that process got kick-started, and it's still in the process, but a lot of reforms in higher education have been done, underway also. Medical education, it was in the worst mess ever because of a lot of the corruption, and often the regulators are being in hand in glove with those that they were regulating and so forth. So a whole new legislation we wrote from the Niti Aayog. And that is again a legislation which is now on the floor of the parliament to be voted very soon. So it will happen before the end of this term of the Prime Minister.
So very concrete.
So very concrete, and we also tried to initiate reforms in the states. So one of the things I did was to, a lot of the areas, land for example, is entirely a state subject in India. Central government doesn't have a whole lot. So there we took the lead with the states. We wrote a model act for land leasing. Land leasing laws are antiquated in India from the 1950s. And in modern times things have changed completely, and so a new kind of regime is required for land leasing. So we wrote the model act. 3 or 4 states actually came and they have now adopted pretty much the model act that we had recommended. More states will come on board. So like that, so we also work with the states. Also, whenever the states will have problems with the central government ministries, I would then tell them, okay, make a collection, write out what are your various problems. So they'll list about a couple of dozen of these issues. Then their top leadership from the government will come to Niti Aayog. I will then call up also all the ministries, relevant ministries. We'll sit, in a very large room, and one by one we'll solve the problems.
Right.
So a lot of things we tried to do. No, so on that I've been on the forefront actually. As you know, I'm very much admirer of a number of reforms that the present government has put in place. But I think on this one, unfortunately, the government officials largely, I think it's bureaucracy driven, and they have gone in the wrong direction. And it took us a long time to bring the tariff regime to a more open orientation. 91 the process started, but it was by the time tariffs finally came down to about 10%, the top tariff rate, and average about 10 to 11%. It was already 2007. So it took 17 years to get there, and unfortunately now some bit of recidivism is going on it, and that's something that the government needs to watch out. So I was very clear to write even publicly in the press that this is the wrong direction for the government, and we'll see what happens. Good outcome, of course, would be if we can somehow use the G20 to get the multilateral trading system back on track. I think, as we'll talk today in the address that I'm going to deliver today, we are in very serious situation on multilateralism with practically a trade war already in progress, particularly between the United States and China, but even a little more widely. So, if there is a way to use the instrumentality of G20 to bring this process back on track, that would be fantastic. But that's a tough, that's a very tall order for G20 to be able to do it. It's a very, because G20 also works on consensus, and right now the differences on trade are rather deep.